I'm John Batchelor. Mary Kissel, the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal and the host of Opinion Journal, WSJ.com. Mary and I are New Yorkers, and we watch the city of New York very carefully, and over these last years, especially under Mayor Bloomberg, it's been a paradise for people working and with families, and we want it to stay that way. We're old-fashioned about that. We don't like the violence that is associated with the bad old days, the 20th century. Ed Hayes, my consigliere, our advisor on New York City crimes. We call upon him because there's an issue that was much talked about in the most recent election, and Mayor de Blasio is at the forefront of those who believe that the NYPD under Commissioner Kelly exceeded common sense in using a policy called Stop and Frisk. It had to do with weapons checking, and especially challenging people who are associated with violence. It got into issues of tribe, of race, of discrimination against by the police. However, Ed, good evening to you. The headline in CBS New York, this is CBS television. If it bleeds, it leads. That's the 20th century. I don't think it talks that way anymore. But in any event, there's a sign here that it's coming back. Violent weekend leaves 21 shot across the 5 boroughs. This is Dateline within these last days. Ed, Stop and Frisk was pulled off because you emphasized it was bad training, excessively aggressive younger police. But these shootings, Ed, is this a direct consequence of the end of Stop and Frisk? Good evening to you.
I tell you why I believe that, John. I believe that because there's an argument to be made that there have been shootings in the past that were not connected, that the amount were not connected to the stops and frisk and so forth. You can argue the increase in shootings. You cannot argue the decrease in gun arrests. 10%. There's been 10% decrease in the amount of the gun arrests over this year. I think the only fair conclusion to that is the people that are not being stopped and frisked and apprehended for guns are out shooting people with them. That's, I think, the key statistic. Not the amount of shootings, but the connection between the shootings and the arrest for possession of guns.
Eddie, you read these headlines, and it's frightening. I'm looking at the New York Post. The headline is, "Gunman shoots up housing project, then crashes getaway car." I mean, shooting up a Queens housing project. Eddie, this stuff is happening in the outer boroughs. It's not in the middle of Manhattan where all of these elites are,
the other thing that's
having dinner parties. I mean, it's the poor that are getting hurt, isn't it?
It's working class neighborhoods. It's people that suffered so terribly in the past from crime. Crime has always been an affliction of working people. They work like animals.
Dogs.
To buy like dogs to buy a nice entertainment device for themselves, and somebody comes in and steals it. Or they buy a good computer for their children, and somebody breaks into the house and takes it or mugs them in the street. No, I agree completely. I just find the connection between the decrease in gun arrests and the increase in shootings to be very persuasive.
Let's connect this with a headline that looks very positive. NYPD rookies hit the streets. This was within these last days. 600 officers graduated New York Police Department on Monday. Many will be placed in 8 of the city's most troubled precincts. That's a good thing. I see them going to the police academy when they arrive at Pennsylvania Station at night. They're young. They've got very broad shoulders, Ed. They all look like they're right out of the military. They're extremely high morale, and yet now, as rookies, they're being put into these same precincts, I'm going to guess.
Well, that's true.
Is that a good thing? Is that smart? Is that good policing?
Bratton is a very good trainer and a very good manager, and I believe they will do a good job. And remember, a lot of these young men are drawn from the Hispanic part of our population. They're accustomed to the streets of New York. They've been trained to be polite, and if you look at them, you can see the level of fitness has gone up very substantially with these younger fellows. They all look like they live in the weight room. And I'm very hopeful that this will be useful. But you can't... one of the things in the post stores, they say, well, they don't put their hands on people anymore. And the whole purpose of being a cop with muscles is to put your hands on people and persuade them that their illegal activities are imprudent. So I'm hopeful, but I think for as long as de Blasio is mayor, you're going to have an increasing crime problem. And the other thing about this is very important is crime is like a dam. Once there's a break in it, it explodes very quickly.
Well, Eddie, that's just it, isn't it? If these young police officers are strong, who cares if they're too afraid to touch somebody because they're afraid that they're going to get sued?
I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. And I also think that that what happens is that they're afraid to arrest the people for these minor crimes, broken windows, loitering in the housing projects. And then when you start doing that, be afraid to do that, then you have an increase in crime. And remember, the shooters are just a prelude to muggings. The guy says, I'm going to shoot my neighbor. Then he says, well, you know, what the heck? I'm going to rob this person and shoot them if they don't give the money.
I emphasize for those who are just arriving in New York or thinking about traveling to New York for the holidays, in no way is anything like the 90s. This is not in the same universe as the 1990s. No. We're being fussy because Bloomberg and Kelly made this city a great pleasure for everyone, not just Manhattan, but Brooklyn, where Mary's very familiar with Brooklyn. On the weekends, it's a party for the families and the young people who live there. And if you can afford to live in Brooklyn, good for you. And Queens and other parts of Manhattan, Staten Island has always been a very safe place. So
the cops live on Staten Island.
The de Blasio politics are what are suggestively a difficulty, an obstacle. One more, Eddie. This has to do with, what are they called, pole dancers, Mary?
I don't know.
John.
What is it?
No, they're subway dancers. They're like subway acrobats.
But they use the pole in
pole dancers are something very different, John.
All right, they use the pole in subway cars to entertain for money.
This is a family show.
And the question here is, the police want to ban them. Do we sense that this is something that is disruptive?
No, no.
I don't like it. I mean, I don't like any of those people going to subways and begging and singing and playing drums and, doing those acrobatics. I just think it's vaguely
Let me check with Mary.
I feel less threatened by the acrobats who are working for that panhandling than I do from these mentally ill homeless people who, you feel for, but you feel threatened by in the subway.
I agree with Mary. You see so many more of them on the street than
you
do.
Right, yeah, and that's also a question mark we raise. Mayor de Blasio, Ed Hayes, Mary Kissel, the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal. I'm John Batchelor.